Spinning. Okay, it says we are live. So, welcome everybody to Vibrant Leadership. This is a podcast that takes leaders from vision through transformation. I'm your host, Crystal Atkinson. And in this podcast, we talk about real strategies and mindsets for today's educational leader to help them move their teams from vision through transformation in ways that empowers everyone involved. In today's episode, we will be talking with Kurtis Hewson. Together, we're going to be discussing the power of layering teams, particularly the collaborative team meeting. The collaborative response model is designed to help educators create and focus on a clear vision of what success would look like, identify insights that matter, and support each other through a process that is designed to maximize student support and ultimately success. That's what we're here for. So this conversation, I think, just might be the missing puzzle piece that your school teams are looking for. A little bit about Kurtis. He is a highly sought after keynote speaker, author, and professional learning facilitator. In addition to being an award-winning teacher, vice principal, and principal, he has also served as faculty at the post-secondary level. He is co-founder of Jigsaw Learning and co-author of the best-selling text Collaborative Response, 3 foundational components that transform how we respond to the needs of learners, and currently works with districts and schools nationally and internationally, establishing collaborative response frameworks and interacting with thousands of educators annually. That's exactly where I first met him. He has been working with the school division that I work full-time with. And so it has been just an absolute joy and privilege to get to know him. So Kurtis, welcome to Vibrant Leadership. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Crystal, I'm so excited for this conversation. Love the work that you're doing on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting to know and work with you through the school division that you mentioned previously. And yeah, this is a real treat for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. So before we get started, for people who you might be new to them, I feel like everybody knows you. Once you meet somebody, right, you're like, everybody knows them. But the truth is, not everybody does. So could you tell us a bit about your journey in education and what led yourself to co-found Jigsaw Learning?
Yeah, so, I've been in education nearing 30 years now. And it's interesting, Crystal. In my first teaching role, I was in a smaller school, and this was in a school division that was really looking at how can we continue to build our leadership base. There was a lot of transitions in the school division. It was a northern school division here in Alberta. And one of the ways that they were looking at was how do we start growing our leadership pool? So I had about, I was in the part of my second year. I had started in January, so finished out that year. And in the very next year, it turned out that our school was going to be getting an AP position. It was a small school and a small role, like a 0.1, but the idea was to start growing the leadership. And I got a tap on the shoulder to say, I think you might want to try this. And I did the same thing that everybody else did, that no, that's not for me. No, I don't think so. And then you reflect and go, oh, well, maybe give that a shot, and was successful with it. And so I was in leadership arenas really, really early in my leadership career. And it was from those experiences that I realized I can't lead the way I've seen others potentially lead. At that time, I did not have the expertise, experience, or voice to be able to be that compelling, charismatic leader that knows the answers to all. I had to start relying on the room. And I learned that lesson really, really early, one that's carried with me. And it was mid-2000s. I was principal. This was, I believe, my third school as an administrator in a school. And we had exceptional teachers doing great things for kids. But there were ways that I thought we could maximize and go even further than what we were able to do. We had students slipping through the cracks and lots of people doing great work, but I could see it happening within silos or in closed door spaces. So we started to put some team structures in place. We learned, we adjusted, we evolved. People started to come visit. I started to get requests out to share, how have you gone about setting this up? And this collaborative response work just kind of organically grew to where it's now what I do full time, working, as you mentioned in the intro, across Alberta, Canada, North America, and beyond, helping schools with this collaborative response framework. We've found over, well, it's about 20 years now of working on it. It's a framework that has just incredible impact, not only for students, but I would say for the educators as well. We see incredible outcomes for the adults working in the buildings, their sense of connection, their purpose, their empowerment. That is, I think, is critically important if we want to see success for our students. So that's a little bit of the pathway journey to get to this place.
that trajectory. So I love that as a young administrator. I know I was there too. You go in, you're really excited, you have all of these ideas, and then people come to you with really complex problems. And they often come with a whole bunch of obstacles, if you will, at least in the schools I was admin in. And I think that the fact that you have a framework that's so easy to implement, that really helps improve efficiency and efficacy within teams in a way that's empowering, not demoralizing at all. I just honestly feel like this is the missing piece for a lot of the people who are in my Vibrant Leadership community, because we talk about communication, we talk about systems, we talk about how do we bring this vision to life. And so knowing kind of that background of my audience and where you are at now, is there a way for you to describe to us what those foundational components of the collaborative response model, and maybe even talk a little bit about how it's different from, like, you know, DeFore's PLC work or the MTSS or RTI? We've got all of these acronyms in education and they all have a piece. Where does the collaborative response model fit? And what are those components that are going to help our leaders listening?
Yeah. So I'll start with the first part of that question, the foundational components. And again, we didn't set out to create a framework that would be copied or replicated in another school. It was just how we were trying to best respond to our students. And when people asked to describe what we were doing, because we were seeing success that was really starting to become pronounced for students and satisfaction rates that were climbing for everyone within the community, it was really hard to describe all the different pieces, how they fit, how they interacted with one another. It was at that point that we said, well, it's how we're collaboratively responding, which then led to name of the framework. And it's interesting, Crystal, we referred to it as a model when we started. We've actually come to the place of, I don't know if it's a model. I think it's a mindset. It's a way of just operating within your building. And it really focuses on three pieces. How do we establish really intentional, really purposeful collaborative structures and processes? That's our first step. And you talked about this layers of team. I can describe for your listeners here in a little bit if you like. And then how do we utilize data and evidence effectively to support and drive those conversations? Actually, I shouldn't say drive. I'm not a big fan of the word data-driven. I like data informed, because I think it's informing that professionalism of our adults that are working in the school. And then that third foundational component is a continuum or continuums of support. How do we get crystal clear on how we're tiering the supports across our school, and that it is clearly articulated throughout our community? So coming to those are our three foundational components. And I often say understanding each of those components is the easy part. Putting them together is really complex work. And when you talk about, PLCs, I think when I go to describe these layers of team, schools that are engaging in PLCs will go, oh, I see how this fits. Absolutely. And with schools that are engaging in where we started with response to intervention, but where I know so many have shifted to multi-tiered systems of supports, they see that too in the layering. And just like you had mentioned, we hear this all the time of people going, oh, this is our missing piece. This one understanding, this collaborative team meeting that I'll describe here in a little bit that pulls it all together. So I get super excited when I hear a school say, but we're already doing PLCs, or we already have a really strong MTSS framework. And I go, oh my goodness, you are going to love what I can share with you here, because you've got a fire already burning. We're about to throw gasoline on it. It's going to go to a new level with the collaborative response work.
Yeah, and you're talking about these teams that are already in place. You've got different PLC groups. You've got your multi-tier groups that are happening in schools. So go dive more deeply into those layering of teams as your key concept, and how we can really just unleash the power of the teams in our schools with this.
Yeah. So Crystal, you've been at this work long enough that you remember when we didn't understand layers of team. We just knew there was this collaborative team meeting and this one meeting structure that was just so powerful. And we saw it transform the way we were talking about students, how we were engaging with one another. And so when people would say, what did you do? We said, we did this thing. And lots of schools would replicate that thing and see success. Other schools would replicate it and not see the same success. And then we start to reflect on why. Like when I watch, the meeting looks very similar. They're following a lot of the things that we said we had in place that was working, and then lots of things that we learned over time that took it to another place. But it wasn't having that impact in some places, and it got us to reflecting on what else is going on. And it was at that point where we went, well, actually, there was other ways we were meeting as teams in our school, not just that one way. That one way changed things, but there were other ways that we were doing this. And then we started to look at other schools where they were seeing huge success and went, oh my goodness, they have similar things. And it took us time to realize that really there's 4 layers of team that we're seeing when this is having optimal impact. Without these layers, all of these different conversations funnel into one space, which becomes then a little chaotic, a little bit overwhelming. So let's walk through these 4 layers if you're good with this.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
And in time, these layers connect with our tiers of support. So we talk about 4 tiers of support, which align to 4 layers of team. And I know for anyone that's engaged in any response to intervention, multi-tiered systems of support, any traditional response talks about 3 tiers. And we're not talking about putting one more on top. We're talking about taking that universal and really getting clear, breaking it down into 2 parts. So here's these layers. This first layer, we call it collaborative planning as an overarching category. So think of these like categories. You might not name any of your meetings by these categories that I'm giving, but the collaborative planning is intended to be when primarily teachers are coming together to look at what could we do to impact all students. Okay, so that might be in grade level teams that you're meeting and establishing a goal and saying this is something we're working on for all of our students at this grade level. I see high schools where we have a department team and here's what we're working on that are going to impact everyone that's in this subject area. Or I see schools where we have these action planning teams and each one has one component of our school's improvement plan and they're leading the work around that. Lots of schools, Crystal, in your mind, what does this sound similar to that's not new work in any way?
Well, we had collaborative team meetings in like 2002 when I was teaching at the high school. So I just love that this is really reflective of what I did like way back when I started teaching.
And you mentioned Do4 and PLCs. Anytime schools hear this and they go, oh, these are our PLCs you're describing. And I say, absolutely. And I'm not saying stop those. That's an important structure. And it's your first layer. Now, we didn't refer to it as PLCs because other schools had other types of mechanisms that weren't necessarily following a true PLC model, but were also effective for them. What we saw as the overarching for collaborative planning was you're doing things that you think will impact all students. This is usually where you're examining data and seeing, are there trends that we want to address? How could we go about doing that? So then, I'm going to skip the collaborative team meeting, the second layer for a second, and go to the third. The third layer, we referred to it as a school support team. And what it was in my own school was every week, the principal, the assistant principal, the learning support teacher, and a family school liaison we shared with the high school. Every week, the 4 of us would meet And before we formalized this, we would meet when we had to, but we've learned over time that it was highly reactive and not that well organized. So we started to put it right into our schedule every Thursday morning. And what was on our agenda were the students who needed support in addition to or beyond the classroom. Lots of time in this conversation, we'd be thinking about who are students that we might need to refer for our divisional team for support. So lots of times, and this is why we often said we didn't have teachers in this conversation. Lots of times the conversation was about how could we support this teacher? What kind of coaching could we do? Is there some PD that we could look at? Could someone go into that classroom and observe or help model? Sometimes it was about responding to the student. Sometimes it was about the teacher, but it was always about what's that next level of support from beyond the classroom. So again, lots of schools that engaged in tiered response type structures have this layer as well. Our fourth layer is the one that I think is the most common across schools. It's the one that's been there universally forever. And we call it the case consult, but really all it is an overarching term for whenever we meet with one kid on the agenda. When there's one student or maybe one family, that is our focus. And we're bringing the right people around the table to be part of that conversation. It fits into this layer. So I know you can think of many different types of meeting structures in your school or schools that you work with where it fits in this. Oftentimes it's related to either student complexity or crisis that is happening. And this is why the layers are so important, because without the layers, if everything's a one student at a time conversation, that is super overwhelming for a school. You're in what I had one school refer to as whack-a-mole mentality of just
and it's so true.
Trying to do all that we can. I had one large high school that when they laid out all the different types of meetings that they were having, most of them fell into this and they went, oh my goodness, this is why we feel overwhelmed, exhausted, just running on a treadmill. So we had these in place. And like I said, at the time, we didn't understand that they were contributing to what would become what we referred to as the collaborative team meeting. It became that second layer. And in time, it became the space where we could address things before it moved to that school support team. But we learned over time that this becomes most powerful. We started by focusing on students, which was a nice starting place. But we've learned over time that actually when we start to shift the focus off the student, it has incredible impact. I often say in the collaborative team meeting, it looks like you're talking about students, but you're not. You're just using the student to leverage a conversation about practice. A powerful, powerful structure that I'd love to describe what it looks like here for you as well.
Yeah. What a mind shift. Like when you went back and you said, this is no longer just a model or a framework. This is really about shifting the mind. And how powerful and supportive is that from like a classroom teacher perspective, which now I work as an instructional coach at a division office, but I was a classroom teacher for a long time. And if I consider, okay, I've got these people in my building who are meeting with intention about those higher needs students in my classroom, I almost feel like that would relieve some pressure off of me so that I can think about, okay, if this is my average, who are these ones that are just below the benchmark where I want them? And how can I meet the needs of these kids just below so that my like at grade level or the 50% in the top half actually gets extended a little bit further down. So I have more students being able to perform at a level that, would bring me pride as a teacher, knowing that I don't actually need to use all of my energy on that one kid, because that one kid is exhausting. And when they leave this year, another kid's just going to replace them. Like that seat is going to get filled with another bumbling.
Or 3 or 5.
Absolutely. So I love that you have helped us shift from thinking we need to be putting all of our resources, time, energy into this one. And instead, what happens if we look at a collaborative team meeting to unpack a practice that can impact more students to reduce our stress and workload. So with that, do you want to tell us a little bit
Yeah.
more about the CTM?
Yeah, you bet. And so you're bang on. Is none of us in this profession want to ignore our students, especially our most high needs or those that are most at risk. But what we're saying through this layering is classroom teacher, there's a conversation happening about these students. There's supports in that. Let's ensure that in the collaborative planning and then the collaborative team meeting that I'll describe in a moment, that it's not consumed by that same student with the same conversation. We're not saying we should be talking about Kurtis in every meeting that we have, even though Kurtis is highly complex and consuming everybody's energy and time. We give space. And the interesting thing is we often say through the collaborative team meeting, especially once we start connecting data to it, we're going to support our most at-risk student by not focusing on them. And so let's talk about what this means in the collaborative team meeting. So the collaborative team meeting has evolved over time, and we're super excited. In May, we're releasing a new book that focuses exclusively on that particular meeting structure, because we've learned so much about what it looks like. And so I'll describe to you, when we first started, it was just about how could we start having a conversation about some of these students before it ever reached that school support team. How could we start empowering our team? Because lots of times there was more expertise out in the classrooms than was sitting around the table at the collaborative or at the school support team. How could we leverage that more effectively? So it started with Crystal, you come and we'd say, who would you like to talk about? And you would say, I'd like to talk about this student. And then we'd all say, oh, yes, I know that student. And then we'd say, you could try this and you could try this. And lots of times that was a really helpful conversation. Sometimes I would jump in and say, you know, something I could do is this. And someone else would jump in and say, I'd also be able to help in this way. But sometimes that person, when we said, who would you like to talk about? Sometimes it would become really overwhelming when people would start saying, you could.
Yes.
And sometimes that would get a little defensive, or it would get a little bit drawn out, meaning that when we'd share things, you go, oh, that one, here, let me tell you more about the student and what I've tried. Sometimes it didn't go as positively as we would have wanted. Now what we do is we shift that focus. We say, before you come ready with a student to celebrate and a student with a key issue. And in time, we want to say a student that the data would suggest is a key issue when we start tying the data to it. And then we start off with some really structural things like, here's our norms. Let's review what's one we want to practice. Here are our meeting roles. We found all of these structures that seemed really intrusive when we first introduced them actually contributed to the conversation immensely, because everyone started to take on a role. For the meeting success, we started to define what does it look like when we're working together effectively. All of these little structures were critically important. So we'd start off with celebrations, and we say, Crystal, who's a student you'd like to celebrate in 30 seconds or less? What is that? And when you would say, I'd like to celebrate my whole class, I've seen such reading growth, let's say, coming for us. At the time, we would go, oh, cool. And we'd write it in our notes. It would be projected up there. And then we'd say someone else have a celebration. But now we've learned that the celebrations aren't just about starting on a positive tone, which was their initial intent when we started. It actually became something much deeper, because when you said, all of my students have seen such incredible reading growth, a facilitator now is going to ask you, who's one that really stood out? This is activating a deeper level of reflection, and it's going to help the next question. So when you say, you know, Gurhinder really has seen some phenomenal growth. When I looked at his data last time, he's jumped from this to this. The next question is the powerful one, where we say, what do you think you did that led to that success? Or what do you think he did, perhaps, that led to that success? And we are fascinated when this conversation comes, because A, you're activating deeper levels of reflection. Like Simon Breakspear tells us, this is so powerful for us in our profession of when we can engage in deeper and deeper levels of reflection around what are we doing. And when you say, well, it's not that big a deal. In my class, I do X. Someone else in the room is going to go, genius. I like that idea. you're triggering some thoughts for me, or maybe confirming. When people then are nodding, going, oh, that's a great strategy, now you feel uplifted.
Right.
When you say, well, it's not that, I just do my thing. But when we say, describe your thing to us, then it becomes really reassuring. And this is actually growing high levels of collective efficacy over and over again, when we can consistently say, we've seen this success and here's what we did that led to it. Powerful stuff. But this next part, Crystal, and you know this is where it all changed. When we could say, all right, Crystal, I know you've come ready with a student. Don't say their name, please, even though you've got it detailed on this pre-meeting organizer. In the pre-meeting organizer, the first time we saw a school where they said, we get people to fill this in before they come, we went, genius. We should have been doing that ourselves. And then in time, I'm looking at my data before I fill that in. So we say, we know you've got a student in mind. Don't say their name. Share with us, what's the key issue that you're seeing getting in the way? And in time, the student that you're selecting is meant to be not the one that's furthest away from where you'd like them to be. It's the one who's close. And we start color coding the data. We often say that if red are most at risk, yellow are the ones who are getting closer, approaching. So let's focus on that band of students. Like you said, it's going to be a little bit easier to get them over the finish, not the finish line, but get them to a place where we'd like for them to be. And then we say, what's a key issue that you're seeing? Now, sometimes this is really hard when we start to get it succinct, to get it down to one thing. But in time, once schools have had practice at this and experiences, it becomes much easier to do. And when you say, well, the student I have in mind, the key issue that I'm seeing is difficulty inferencing. Now, we might ask a few questions of, what do you mean? What does that look like for us? But again, don't say the name. And you say, the kid can read, and I'm going with some really easy examples here for us, but kid can read words on the page, but when you ask him, so what did that mean? Can't put it together. Just can't make that mental picture. And so we say, all right, reading proficient or sounding out words, but unable to develop a mental picture. Do you think that's the key issue? And you go, yes. We write that down, and then we say to everyone in the room, all right, everyone else, think of a student where you're also seeing that. I oftentimes, when I facilitate these now, I'll say, write down the name, but don't say it out loud, because what we're trying to do is get the attention off the student that you brought to begin with, even if you didn't say the name, and we're trying to get the attention off it being your problem, Crystal. It becomes, this is a shared key issue. And when somebody says, oh, I don't really have anyone like that at this time, we go, no problem, because now we're going to say, all right, what could we do? What are the things that we could do for a student that is reading the words but can't form the mental picture? And you jump in and say, actually, when I facilitate these now, I'll often say, take a minute and just jot down some ideas to get ready for sharing. We start sharing out that in my room, here's an exercise that I do. And you say, I have this resource that has some really good activities for this. And another person says, I have some reading activities I send home for parents to practice with that. And somebody else goes, oh, that's an interesting idea. What if we made some videos that could show what inferencing looks like? And then somebody else jumps onto AI and says, hey, AI says, here's 10 ideas that we could be trying. We're writing all these things down. And then a timer goes off and we say, okay, good. Now we come back. Crystal, who is the student that you have in mind? Just the name, no story. And what's one thing that you want to try? We write it down and we ask, when do you plan to do it? We set the timelines to it. And then we go to the next teacher and say, who's a student that you had? Just the name, no story. And what's one thing you want to try? And we go around like that. Now, teachers are totally in control of what their next steps are. And I often see when first starting, people reach for low-hanging fruit. I'll often hear people say, well, I was already going to do this, so put me down for that. Or I've done what Crystal said. I've done that in the past, so I'll try that again for us. But what we find in time, and especially when we start building up high levels of psychological safety in those teams, we start hearing people trying things that might have been past their stretch zone previously. We start seeing things like, I really am intrigued with Crystal's idea, but I'm not sure how to do it. Now, if I'm Crystal, the instructional coach in that meeting, and someone says, I'd like to try this, you're jumping to say, would you like any help with that? Could I help you? Could I model that for you? Or as an administrator, I'm often listening to when somebody says this, I might say, Crystal is really strong at that, or teacher X really good at that. Time for you to meet. Could I come cover your kids for phys ed so that you could go and watch this person do this thing in their classroom? What we're trying to do through this experience in this meeting is just build incredibly deep toolboxes for everyone, just through teacher innovation. And Crystal, teachers, educators, adults in schools are such amazing people. You know this.
Absolutely.
They have a passion, for student success, which is why I say never get rid of the student name. Knowing that there's a name attached to this is critical for connecting to our heart. But I've done hundreds of these meetings now, either facilitating or observing. I still walk out of them, and it happened to me just last Friday. I walk out of an idea because teachers are constantly learning, they're constantly growing, they're sharing their ideas, and then all of a sudden, something I'm struggling with, I had no idea that 3 doorways down the hall that had a solution for me. Powerful structure.
Absolutely. So when we think about this structure and how this really is designed to bring our staff together to work as a team for our students, to support them, to bring them to their fullest potential, and maybe reduce some of the frustrations and roadblocks that we as educators face, what would you say some of the obstacles or situations that leaders may overlook when it comes to implementing early on? So if they're new and they want to start this, what's something that you find leaders may often overlook?
I would say the first one, the structures, the simple things like, are there norms established? And I will be the first to admit, I overlooked these structures. I heard Richard Dufour, who you mentioned early on, I heard him years ago talk about the power of norms for teams. And I went, that must be for big schools like the one you were in, where they don't know each other well, or maybe staff don't get along. Everyone in my building loves each other. We get along great. And I found that was the case when we were having surface level conversations. When we started poking and prying into each other's practice, I've heard you say before, the space in my classroom is a very personal space. It's a big part of who I am and my identity. And when people start poking at it a little bit or asking you to explain, what do you mean when you say this? Those are hard conversations. And we found out we needed to say things out loud, like everyone's voice matters. And we will always listen with intentionality. We had to say some of those out loud. And then we had to say, okay, when we meet today, let's practice this one together. Or when somebody says, I've heard these roles are worthwhile, but we're pretty efficient in our conversations. And lots of times when I'm observing, I'm saying in my head, they really need to determine who's the timekeeper. They really need to say out loud who's facilitating. And even more, whoever is facilitating, when you facilitate, what's your job? What does it look like when you do this? I think that's one of the first things that I see is feeling like the structures are just a little bit too mechanical, and it'll interrupt the flow of our conversation. I hear that lots of times. It's going to interrupt the flow or the creativity. And I've found through hundreds of experiences that it actually does just the opposite. When people have clarity, and I know a timer is going to go off at a certain point, I'm not sitting there going, how much longer are we going to talk about this? Like my mental capacity is not focused on logistics. It's focused on solutions, and it's predictable. That would be my first one. The second one, I think, is not being confident enough to put some of the structures in, and even like connecting data and expecting things for people that are going to feel uncomfortable, that the first time you ask are probably going to have a little bit of pushback
Yeah.
for us. And I often share, try it once, get past the discomfort, and it may mean that people have to have an experience before they go, oh, I get it. This makes
Right.
sense. This idea of filling out a pre-meeting organizer before we meet seemed utterly ridiculous. Like, why do the work before the meeting when we're going to meet in the meeting to discuss things, and then fill it out and go, oh, we actually got way quicker into the conversation than before. And when somebody says, now here's your criteria for what type of student to bring, and getting just really crystal clear on that, it doesn't mean that you don't listen to others or that you're going to forge ahead with your vision, but or with your way of doing things. You're constantly going to have feedback cycles, and how could we look to improve upon this? But I think holding people accountable to what we've said that we'll be putting in place, I think that's one of the first struggles, or one of the biggest struggles I see people have. And the irony here is, what may feel uncomfortable when you first start is what makes it so much more comfortable in time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And so what I'm hearing you say is trust the process.
Yeah.
Don't try to reinvent it or make a new one. You have an entire process that is really easy for school communities to implement. So dive into these resources and use them as their design, make them your own. But when you get started, trust the process, because you have, like you said, 20 plus years of figuring this out and encountering all of those obstacles and learning, oh, okay, this is why we do this, and this is why we do this.
So, Crystal, you're bang on. And I know you've seen this in your school division of trust the process. I hear that all the time from leaders. When I say, what advice would you give other leaders? They always say that. But then once you trust the process and follow it with fidelity to begin with, then you can start to tweak. It's just like that expert teacher who learns this writing program that really takes their writing to that. But then when they get proficient at it, they start making their own subtle tweaks, their own subtle evolution. I've seen veteran teachers who can take a framework or an instructional practice, implement it the way it was intended, and then they start improving upon it, building upon it. And this is why I often say I'd be embarrassed to show what our school, how the process looked like in our school, even 5 years in, back in 2010, because I see schools that are just so much further ahead. And again, that's not a critique on our people. Our people were doing amazing work, but I've seen people add their own little tweaks and nuances, and you come in and you'll see it and go, oh, that's genius. We're going to start sharing that within it. We're constantly growing and understanding the collaborative response work on virtually a daily basis. When again, you see amazing people that have made their own little twists or nuances once they've understood the why behind it. It becomes so powerful. So I'm sure you see this when you go across schools in your division, where you go, nobody's quite doing this the exact same, but the underlying currents are recognizable.
Right. And that really becomes, when you have that in place, what it does is it allows teachers to just work more efficiently. Like you said, teachers are working really, really hard, and the job has become much more complex than what it was 20, 25, 30 years ago.
100%.
And so when you have somebody like yourself and Lorna come in and work with the school community, what it does is it just opens up like the doorway to let some light in and think, okay, we can go further, faster by working together in this way as we support students.
And Crystal, you're bang on with that. And I often say to people, I'm not coming in with a magic formula so that you don't have to work hard. I don't know of many people in schools that are afraid of hard work. What I hear is people who are hesitant to put in the effort if we don't know if we're going to yield results out of it. I often say to people that you're still going to work hard through this, but you're going to see your efforts have way more impact. You are going to see results that you may not have gotten on your own when we're working in a highly intentional, purposeful, collaborative culture.
Yeah. And so that culture piece is kind of that next and one of the final things I really would love to unpack with you. Yeah. Listeners of my podcast recognize the importance of creating vibrant school communities. These are places that really are designed to conquer the brain drain by empowering their entire community to thrive. So how have you seen the collaborative response model shift school culture over time? And what does that transformation look like?
So I think the way I've seen it is in schools, there's strong relationships between the adults in most buildings, or at least there's people who are connected in different ways. But the interesting thing is we may have those relationships without having any idea of what they do in their classroom on a daily basis, of the strategies, the resources, the approaches that they take. I might have a sense, but teachers specifically typically don't get to see other teachers teach. And so I think when we can start putting in the structures and processes like a collaborative team meeting, where it not only normalizes us talking about instruction, but actually reinforces and celebrates it, I think that has an incredible impact in our building. I often joke to say we had centuries of teaching experience in the building. We weren't leveraging it as effectively as we could to impact all students. Sometimes we were looking for expertise that existed on the other side of the building, and we didn't know. So I think that's one of the most critical pieces that, or the shifts that I've seen with that. And I also think when it comes to creating those vibrant cultures, I sometimes have people make a little bit of the mistake of, well, I have to work on the culture before I can start introducing some of these strategies or systems or whatnot. And I often say it's not one before the other. You're going to build culture while you're doing this. And a key learning for me that came early on was this idea in schools of approaching our work with a ready, fire, aim mentality. And the idea that we ready ourselves by having conversations, by asking questions, by reflecting, by doing some learning, some planning, but then fire. Don't wait until you've got it perfectly mapped out. If you're a leader within your mind or perfectly laid out for the entire staff, or I sometimes hear people, but how do I get buy-in? And I say, I think you're looking for the wrong thing. Don't look for buy-in. Look for starting points. Look for small seeds that you can start planning. Just fire. Just fire. And then build your critical mass as you go. Those people that were not seeing the vision early on will see it through the firing. And then that aim is when we tweak and we engage in feedback cycles and say, okay, we tried this. It's not quite working. What could we do a little bit differently? I've heard you use the phrase failing forward before. We're comfortable failing forward in that fire phase because we're going to learn and then we'll aim again.
Yeah. John Maxwell says we either win or we learn. And so when we haven't won, well, we just have more data. That didn't work. What's next? And how can we support each other?
I don't know if it gets credited to Edison, but I know a lot of things that happened with Edison was part of a team. That's a fascinating story when people go, well, Edison invented the light bulb. No, he had a team that was working through that. He was leading it, but I love the one quote that comes from that of, I didn't fail 1,000 times at creating the light bulb. I figured out 1,000 ways that didn't work yet, or something. I'm paraphrasing, but it was
I know the
powerful little reminder for us that, you learn. And I
And
think,
what a thing, like as a leader, when you give your teams permission to try and learn,
yeah,
right? This isn't about failing. This is about learning for our students and
yeah,
modeling.
and we are way stronger when we're a learning organization than one that is held in paralysis of if we
Mhm.
make a mistake, the old adage of heads will roll. Nah, we'll learn from it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. This, I truly believe, is the missing piece for a lot of our school communities who they're doing really great work and they're looking for something to bring it all together. I
Yeah.
think this is going to help a lot of people. So I appreciate your time and your expertise more than I can even say. Where can listeners find you, Kurtis, and Jigsaw Learning?
Yeah, so the easiest place is our website, jigsawlearning.ca, or you can go to everychilddeservesateam.com. It's going to take you to the same place. That's really the core of why we're doing this, is because I believe every child deserves us to be working
Mhm.
as a team. If you check out Jigsaw Learning and Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, find us there. We have our Leading Collaborative Response podcast, as well as our Building a Culture of Collaboration podcasts as well, for those that are listening and searching out some further podcasts. And we are getting set up for our new book around collaborative team meetings. So people can check out collaborativeteammeetings.com, and that's going to take them to some resources connected to the new book as well. If you go to that now and it's not quite set up, I think it redirects to our website, but in time,
Okay.
we're going to be featuring that new release.
Yeah, that's very exciting work. I've had the privilege of being able to get some sneak peeks behind the pages there, and I can say this is going to be good stuff. If you're looking for next school year for what you're wanting to do as teams, you need to start there because it's going to help transform your team. So thank you for that. Be sure, if you don't already, press follow on my podcast, jump over to Kurtis's. If you're listening on LinkedIn, you're getting the preview because I post this into the podcast world usually a few days after it goes live in LinkedIn. And I'll be sure to put all of Kurtis's information in the show notes there as well. So thank you so much for your time, Kurtis. And listeners, thank you for all of the work that you do. Go forward, make today amazing, because your work truly makes a difference in the world.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And your work is making a difference as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just ending the